Hi, Simon. Hi, Kate. How are
Hello.
you?
Hi. Very well, thanks.
Can I ask you to introduce yourselves? Kate, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm Kate McGeevor and I'm the manager at Stretford Public Hall.
I'm Simon Borkin. I'm now, as of a few weeks ago, the chair of Stretford Public Hall.
And what were you doing before? Are you full-time on Stretford Public Hall at the moment? Or
Yeah, so I'm full-time and I've been at the hall for about 5 years now. Over 5 years, I think.
Okay. What were you doing before?
I was the manager of a farm.
Okay.
So I was working on a farm.
Quite different.
Well, maybe similar.
How about you, Simon?
So I got involved in 2016, which was just as the Friends group had negotiated the transfer of the hall from the council into community ownership. So the chair at the time, Anushka Dayton, basically I got involved through my day job, which I worked at Cooperatives UK, which is sort of trade body for co-ops, and Stretford Public Hall. Got involved in a government program called Community Economic Development, and it was basically looking at how communities could have a greater stake in how neighbourhoods and localities could, stimulate economic development. And I came to the hall not knowing much, and then met Anushka and met Dan, another founding member, and Lisa. And then Anushka approached me and said, "Hey, do you want to come and join the board?" And I sort of said, sounds quite interesting. And yeah, that's like 7 years now. So
7 years.
Yeah.
And you don't just do that. You've got other responsibilities as well, or you freelance for
so I suppose
bodies.
We're the organisation. So Friends of Stretford Public Hall is what's called a charitable community benefit society, which is essentially like a member-owned charity. So I'm a trustee, and typical of a charity, the trustees, it's a voluntary role. So I suppose I've always predominantly worked with the hall in a voluntary basis, albeit I did spend a small amount of time. I came off the board and was a sort of project organizer at the very start of the ballroom transformation. But my day job is a nice kind of complement that I work with other communities and co-ops around doing similar projects. So it's very, I suppose, mutually beneficial in that I can draw a lot on experience at the hall to help other groups, and equally I get experience what other organisations are doing and hopefully bring it to the hall.
It's pretty good experience. So because this episode is on Stretford Public Hall, how it was renovated at the moment, how it's run, and what's the future of the hall. I've got a small game about Stretford and Stretford Hall. So there's 5 questions. There's nothing to win yet, but maybe for future episodes there will be something to win. But do you know who was at the origin of Stretford Hall? And when was it built?
It's not a trick question, so I presume it's John Rylands.
So John and then Ricketta.
Yes.
And Ricketta Rylands.
Yeah.
And
the date is not an absolute consensus on.
Because we were told it was on our website or something, and then we were told it was wrong. Was it 1879?
Yeah, so I think based on records I've seen, 1878 or 1879. So it'll be interesting to know what date you've got there.
Well, the date I've got is 1878.
1878, okay.
And obviously, there's John Rylands it was quite interesting when I did that research. He was quite a rich man, like working in textile, and he had 15,000 people working for him with 17 mills and factories, and was producing 35 tons of cloth a day, which I think was quite interesting to know, especially about John Rylands. And there's a library as well that was built by his wife when he died.
He was Manchester's first millionaire.
Was he?
Yeah.
There you go. I didn't know that.
And he lived over not far from here in Longford Hall, which was in Longford Park.
So Stretford used to be an agricultural village in the 19th century, but it wasn't called Stretford Do you know what it was called before?
Well, I know it was a lot of pig farming around here. Pighampton, I've heard a term.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Porkhampton.
Porkhampton.
Because, there was a lot of pigs raised and produced here. What's the population of Stretford? And that's the data from 2011. And obviously I've got ranges for you to help you.
Okay. It's multiple choice.
35,000 and 40,000, 45,000 and 50,000, and 55,000 and 60,000.
Okay.
I thought it was 39,000, so I think first.
I think, yeah.
So
It's the first option.
It's 46,000.
Oh.
46,000.
Close to 47.
Okay.
There may be also tricks in some questions, but which building or facility is not part of Stretford? Manchester United's football ground, Lancashire County Cricket Club ground, or the Imperial War Museum near the Media City?
I mean, I imagine the Imperial War Museum is more Salford. That would be my guess.
Well, they're all in Stretford.
They're all in Stretford.
Didn't know
And
that.
I didn't realise also Old Trafford is part of Stretford.
Yeah.
It's not outside of Stretford. And during the Second World War, Rolls-Royce Merlin engines were produced in Trafford Park, which is part of Stretford, and it's the world's first industrial estate, apparently. These engines were powering two famous aircrafts. What are these two aircrafts?
Famous aircraft.
Yeah, I was going to say like a Spitfire or something.
I've got to say, aviation isn't my strong point.
Yeah, it's okay. They're very well known. I mean, I know I'm pretty sure you've heard those names.
Put us out of our misery.
The Spitfire.
Oh, yes. Spitfire. Okay.
And the Lancaster.
Lancaster bomber.
Bomber.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
So, about the Stretford Hall, can you tell us how it all started from the renovation idea, why you wanted to do it, and how you raised money? Don't know who's the best person to start.
Okay, yeah, I'll do my best to give you the short plotted history. So obviously we've covered the hall's been 1878. The hall was opened, and at that time it was very much Stretford Public Hall. It was built for the purposes of the community. I mean, I'm sure Kate will be able to come in terms of some of the uses over time, but it had really mixed offer over the years. Initially it had a library, swimming baths. I'm trying to think of other uses. I mean, obviously this ballroom that we're sat in was used for all sorts of events and community activities. And then essentially it was when Enriqueta passed, it moved to the council basically became the custodian of the building. And I suppose the next kind of notable, change was when it became Stretford Civic Theatre, which I'm going to say was in...
Post-war.
Yeah,
49, I think.
49. So actually quite a lot of residents who've lived in Stretford will know it as the Civic, because that was its primary it was primarily a theatre.
Mm-hmm.
And then essentially it was in the 90s where I think the council, it was basically, it was difficult for it to carry on as a civic theatre, was my understanding. So the council basically took it on and it became sort of de facto council offices actually it might have been a bit earlier, but so it was essentially, even in this ballroom, you had it was used as office space, which is quite bizarre, really.
Yeah.
And it was around 2012, 2013, I think the council recognised that actually they didn't see a future for them using it as a council space. And I think that they basically started to test out alternative uses and see if there was interest. In that I think I don't think they had any, grand plan, but they realised, and it was at that point that actually the community. Well, it was actually the founding members, Anushka, Dan, and Lisa, initially spearheaded a kind of a campaign to say, actually, because it was starting to come out in the public domain that the council were looking at alternative uses of the building, and they basically saw how fantastic the space was, and that actually what Stretford really lacked was a kind of central civic space, community space. Obviously, we have the mall over the road, but there's no natural district centre.
Yeah.
So essentially, they started to build a campaign around pushing for bringing the hall back into community use.
When was it?
So that would have been about 2013, 2014.
Okay.
And it was an interesting time because actually it was about that time that the Localism Act had been passed, which was basically giving communities greater powers to take ownership of assets.
Okay.
So there was essentially a bit of legislation called the Community Asset Transfer, which gave councils the ability to basically transfer assets at sub-market value to communities. So it was sort of good timing in a way, because there was a bit of energy and interest in the idea of communities taking on assets, and there was a bit of funding as well. So,
do you know how much was available as a funding?
Well, I mean, I think it was, in a way, it was relatively generous funding, given current circumstances, if you compare it to now. But so I think I know the Friends group basically were able to draw on, I think, maybe around £50,000 for all the professional services that they needed to put a convincing bid together to the council. So architects, accountants, legal. So that was really critical, because actually I think there was interest at the council I think they saw the value of a community asset transfer, but obviously the community need to put together a convincing case. And obviously you need some expertise to help do that. Yeah. But it was very much driven through the community. They did some fantastic work just building a supporter base. I think they had got 2,500 people signed up to a mailing list. And they did some crowdfunding. And then the council said, well, we're going to invite bids. Mm-hmm. So the community basically put a bid in. I think it needed to be in on the 23rd of December, 2014, I think. So I think it was I think it was a bit of a kind of pressure, getting a bid together amongst the community just the 2 days before Christmas. Yeah. And so, but they managed it, and the council basically agreed to the asset transfer based on that bid, and then actually sold the building to the community. When you say the community, was it like a charity? Or yeah, so it was... How does that work? Does the community have to set up a charity together and say, we represent the Stretford community, and therefore they can apply for grants and say, we've got the plans of renovating Stretford Hall? Yeah, exactly. It was... So that initial funding, some of that was to basically help work out what was the best legal model. Yeah. And actually that was where it was quite interesting, because initially it was set up as a charitable company just to get going. It was quite quick, just needed an entity just to be able to raise a bit of funding. Mm-hmm. But it was during that time it was recognised that actually the whole business plan kind of was underpinned by the idea that we'd have to raise money from the community to invest. The building wasn't in the worst condition, but it definitely needed investment to realise what we wanted to do to turn it into an active community hub. So it was at that point that we recognised that there was this quite valuable legal model called a community benefit society. It's a type of cooperative, but essentially allows community members to take a demo. So every member of Stretford Public Hall is one member, one vote. So the community that become members. So we do co-own it together, and we can all participate as a member, and we'll come on to it. But essentially, the community were able to invest. So that was quite a key part of the identity of what we were doing here. So actually, the council's we bought it for £10, but the investment needed was obviously much more. And then basically, the most powerful thing we could do is actually allow the community to invest, because it allowed the community to take a stake in the organisation, and it then convinced other funders that actually people really want this. I think it's a really powerful way to say, if people are willing to put £100 in, it's really powerful to say this is something that the community are really getting behind. So it was I think it was a really important first step along the way.
So is that what happened? They put £100. Most people put that much money. Do you remember do you have statistics?
I do sadly have all the statistics of the share offer
Great.
in my head, despite it being about 5 years ago. So when we basically convinced the council that we could run this space as a really active community cultural hub, we basically said that a main part of that was to renovate the ballroom that we're sitting in now, because actually this is, as you can see and hopefully hear from the ambience, it's a great, significant space. There's nowhere else in Stretford that you've got this kind
definitely.
of... So we always said that we were going to raise money from the community to basically transform the ballroom, because there were a number of issues around the condition and the offer. We couldn't realise the potential of the ballroom until we invested in it. So we basically went and did the share offer in 2017, and we launched it on the 2nd of February, and we were aiming to raise £250,000, which is quite scary.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah. And we sort of knew that there was enough interest and energy, but you'd never quite know whether people were really going to go for it. We were quite fortunate because we got some match funding. So for every £1 the community put in, a funder called Power to Change would match up to 100,000. So that definitely helped.
Yeah.
But in the end, we actually raised 255,000.
That's great.
From about 800 members, and we said with the minimum was £100. So it's not nothing. It's quite we were really amazed that probably about 2/3 of our investors put in 100, and then we got a few slightly larger amounts, and the majority came from local. So it was predominantly local investors. About 80% were from Stretford.
That's quite impressive, 80%. Were you involved at that time, Kate?
No, that was before I joined.
It's just was it just after the funds were raised, or?
I joined in 2018. Yeah, so the following year.
And so it's at which time did you start? You started to raise money, you got the money, but did you put some plans to show people what you were going to do and say what they're going to invest in?
Exactly.
A bit like Stretford Mall, I guess.
So I think the big learning for us was with a building like a heritage building, you can obviously do a certain amount of feasibility to understand. Like, we had some headline plans about what we were going to do, but we were keen to raise the money. So we knew that we were going to obviously have to do some more detailed investigation to actually really finalise the work. And essentially, we raised £255,000, which was a fantastic achievement. But if I'm brutally honest, we didn't entirely know whether that amount of money could enable us to do the work that we needed, because we couldn't do the level of exploratory work around structures. There's so many variables. And it was actually really only until Kate came in that we had someone who could really dedicate their time to unpick but what was really valuable is that we could bring in other funding from other funders, because we could say, look, because the funders could see that we were doing something that was really going to generate community benefit. We had 800 members that were all wanting this.
And so which funders did you attract, or did you convince, and how much did you raise after? Were you able to raise some money after, presumably?
Yeah, we did. We raised, so Power to Change, the community business fund, we had almost 300,000 from them in addition. And then we had another 70 from Viridor. And Veolia.
Yeah.
So we did, it was about another 400,000 we had.
And what did you renovate then? What sort of works were you able to do with that amount of money?
So in between, we had to do some work on the roof. So we took a decision to remove the lead from the roof and to replace that with steel. So that was quite a big cost as well that sort of needed doing. And we did some renovation work on the lift. And then in terms of the ballroom package, that were the sort of renovation. And then actually before that, there was so all of the floor of the ballroom had to be reinforced, but that had to be done from below.
Okay.
So there was a big bit of renovation. The first phase was all carried out on the ground floor.
Yeah.
And that as part of that, we removed some of the internal walls in the rooms below. So there was a sort of a first phase downstairs, and then the main ballroom renovation. We sorted out all the electrics. So we spent quite a lot on M&E, new heating, so all new radiators. We put in 2 new kitchens, sort of 2 new kitchenettes, and then all the decoration and the treatment of the floor.
Yeah, the floor looks great. Is the original one?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks great. How long did that all last in total? The renovation process, not the tender process, but the construction, the renovation.
I mean, it was quite a long. We had to change some of our sequencing. So basically, doing the structural work on the floor did first, but it activated the rooms below.
Yeah.
Which wasn't always the plan, but actually it was quite a value. It made, because that's the thing. When we were a live site, we were having people in, booking the building and tenants. So actually having some high quality spaces ahead of, in the end, lockdown and things slightly changed the proposition, but it meant that, we had that kind of phasing approach, which, to be honest, we hadn't anticipated at the beginning, but I think was probably quite helpful because, in 2 ways, I suppose it was doing a smaller package of works initially, I think helped skill us up to, because it is overseeing a construction project is quite complicated.
Yeah.
And, so I think it was helpful that it gave us some experience of overseeing that and working with the contractor and the architect and all the other, before we then came up to do the ballroom phase, which was obviously a larger, more complex, I would say equally complex, but larger. But it did mean that I would say it was a long, a long period really from the moment that we'd sort of raised the funding, which we did by April 2017, that community share offer. And then it wasn't until July 2021 that we had our opening event in the ballroom. So
that's quite a long time.
4 years.
What are the challenges of renovating a place like this? Obviously, it's grade listed 2.
Grade 2 listed, yeah.
What are the challenges? I'm sure there's a lot of heritage boxes to tick, or...
Yeah, I think because it was all internal, most of the ballroom work was internal. We didn't. There was a bit of sort of discussion with the conservation officer, but apart from the decoration, which they were quite keen to make sure was done sympathetically, we weren't doing anything that was too sort of, disruptive. We were restoring it to how it would have been rather than making changes that were seen as sort of modernising it, I think. So I think the conservation officer was really happy with the way that we did it. And we were working with heritage architects that had lots of sort of experience. So I think that helped. I think the real challenge that we found was probably around like the heating and the ventilation system. So we spent a long time, the engineers did like modelling the ventilation and looking at how we might heat it and how we might cool it, and trying to think that through. So that was, a challenge. And then I guess there's just unknowns, things that you sort of discover when the work was going on. So just behind us, we've got a kind of little kitchenette area that was installed as part of the renovation. Yeah. And when we came to put that in, we just discovered this Victorian steel sort of girder running right across the gap where we were planning to kind of create this gap. And luckily, the structural engineers managed to work out that it could be removed and it wasn't a problem. But we just didn't know that was there until, we started the work. So a few things like that, I think we sort of uncovered as we went. I
think the other challenge is also, again, because, you've got so many expectations about the space.
Yeah.
So obviously, as a board of trustees, we had a view of how we thought the space would work, but obviously we did consultation with the community. We had certain stakeholder groups, like sort of dance societies who, we'd spoken to about, how could we make it suitably compatible with dancing and the floor, everything from the stain on the floor getting exactly, a certain amount of, what would you call it? I forget, there was like a terminology, wasn't there, for how slippy the floor.
Okay, yeah.
But then you've got health and safety concerns if it's too, because and so you have all these competing interests and expectations, and because we were keen that we basically didn't try and shut any doors around what we could do in the space, have as many options. So, it wasn't going to be predominantly a music venue or predominantly a theatre or predominantly a cinema. The idea is we could do all sorts of different things in the space, but you're obviously having to make compromises and about how you keep all those uses in play, basically.
I didn't realise that aspect, how if you have 80 kids jumping up and down and running on the floor, is there limitation? Does the existing floor is limited to this? Can you have this? And I guess it's it's big limitation, but hopefully that's something that you've been able to sort. Yes, you have, because you do organise those sorts of events.
And I think the buttress to the architects, I think, my feeling was they really got what we wanted in terms of always thinking about the practical elements of where we're going to store things, all those things that when you want a multi-purpose space and you're working with volunteers and you've got to. So my feeling was that they really helped crystallise those things, because we're like, we want this and that, but then it's actually making that happen is quite difficult.
Yeah, they were very patient, and I think they recognised that there's a lot of competing interests and a lot of people with different interests. I mean, they said afterwards that they'd never worked on a project that had involved so many paint samples, because there was just lots of people with ideas about what colours things should be, and they really tried to accommodate that and helped us have the sort of space to make those decisions, and recognised it was really important for everyone to sort of be on board with those things. So they were really good at managing that, but also kind of saying no when they had to, and saying like, you can't afford that. It would have been lovely to have stripped other floors and to have done things probably to a different standard, but they were very pragmatic as well and said, you want to finish on time, we want to finish on budget. This is, we're telling you can't do that. And it was like, okay, right, yeah.
Yeah, managing clients' expectations.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when the client is sort of an amorphous...
800
members, a board, the staff, volunteers, funders.
About the colours, did you have to get probably not approval But did you have to put that down to the 800 members and say, these are the colours we want? And what do you think? And you have a big vote.
Well, no, I mean, I think this is like an interesting... Because I think people, when you talk about like co-ops and community, it's like, you know, when you say, oh, everyone has a stake, obviously there's practical considerations where you can't put every decision to all the members because it would be impossible. So I think that's where we as a board, like that's sort of where we have the accountability and responsibility, that we're there to sort of represent the members. Mm-hmm. And so that was, we're always like thinking like, oh gosh, we really want, and especially because when we did the share offer, we sort of talked about this ballroom transformation. We're going to create this fantastic space. And people, you know, so you've got, and it's not like, you know, these investors that live in, you know, these are friends and neighbours and people that you know, so you've got that real accountability every time you walk down the street. So it's like, how's the ballroom going? You're like, so it's like the decision making is obviously managed. And I think also what was key is that even within the board, we sort of identified a working group that could spend the time and help decide on the colour scheme and things. Because again,
what was the colour before?
Well, it was
salmon pink.
Yeah, it was an interesting salmon pink colour.
Did you have freedom to have the colours you wanted instead of protection?
We had a historic paint expert came in and they took samples from downstairs in the foyer and up here. Mm-hmm. And it was hoped that they would be able to establish what the original colour scheme had been. But actually the ballroom had been re-skimmed as part of a renovation, I think in the 80s or 90s. So there wasn't any evidence of what it would have been. Okay. So we did have a bit of freedom in that sense. The architects put together, I think 2 or 3 colour schemes that they said would have been typical. Mm-hmm. The one that they said was probably quite accurately what it would have been like was quite garish, wasn't it? It was a sort of pinky, and it was very dark brown.
So
brown,
I remember the brown
pink,
shades,
like brown, pink, and orange or something. Yeah, and we were just like, it's kind of cool, but we needed it to be relatively the sort of. I think we were thinking about like wedding photos and the sort of space that people would want to be getting married in. So we thought, well, we probably need to go for the slightly more neutral, I guess, scheme.
Yeah. Although I think for me personally, I love the gold motif. Yeah. It really, I don't know, it just brings out the And I think that was something that the historic paint specialists, they said that you would have found quite, is that, am I right
it would have been ornate.
Ornate, that kind of like, it wasn't always muted shades, that you could have a bit of...
well, you see that downstairs, don't you? With all the very, the terracotta that's very heavily patterned, all of the downstairs. So it would have been, I mean, we've got historic photos that show a frieze at some point. So there would have been some sort of decorative frieze all around the ballroom, but there's no evidence of that and not many photos. So
I like the contrast between really dark and pastel and lighter, which blends quite well with everything. Yeah. And also the varnish of the floor is great. So everything blends. Obviously, you had a professional, so you knew what they were doing, and you had different options.
I mean, one of the things on the colour scheme, I don't know if it's ever played into but the BBC filmed in the ballroom for a drama called World on Fire. And I always get the feeling that they did a kind of paint job, didn't they, for that? And I've always felt like that provided a little bit of inspiration but maybe I'm a little bit off there, because I felt like it did have that kind of green.
I think they just painted because they didn't want to get a scaffold. I think that was a practical thing. They just did painted the lower half a different colour. Yeah.
But we kind of saw that and thought, actually, that looks quite nice. And it was just something that they sort of did just for the purpose of the filming.
So, what's the structure of the organisation now? And also, that's something that I'm quite interested in. I don't know about. Obviously, you said you are registered as a community benefit society. Can you explain the difference between the co-op and CICs, so community interest companies? Well, obviously they're all for the benefit of a community, but what's the subtle difference, and why did you go for the benefit society?
So really, the main difference is just in a CIC is a type is a company. It's still a type of company, which means that you still would have quite often owner directors. Mm-hmm. So most community interest companies will have a set of directors that fundamentally own the organisation. So while they might have a wider membership base, it's still the directors that own, and they will have limits on how much of the profits they can utilise privately, and as a recognition that it needs to deliver community purpose. Whereas we're a society, and a society is fundamentally a different legal model to a company. And it is obviously the history of societies is from Manchester, Rochdale, where you had the first cooperative societies. Mm-hmm. And that's basically saying that you don't, it's the members that own the organisation collectively and have a democratic say. So what that actually means is that everyone has a vote at the AGM and elects the board, and we're, as board members, are accountable to our members.
Okay.
So it's distributed ownership amongst the community, which is the so it's that fundamental difference of not having concentrated ownership, but distributed.
Yeah, I didn't realise you had to elect the board.
So at the AGM, we have elections.
So how is it structured at the moment? You're chair, and who's part of the board? And can you explain a bit?
So we have at the moment we've got 12 board members. Mm-hmm. So we had our AGM in November, and we had a new intake of about 4 or 5 new board members, which is really great because bring new fresh perspectives and energy. Which having been involved for a number of years, it's great to have new people come in. So essentially the board, we have that kind of a wider strategic role for the organisation. But, what's great now is we the day-to-day work is with Kate and the team. Because when we first started, we were a very active board. We didn't have any staff. Yeah. So we had to do everything, which was stressful and probably unsustainable. It's that the growth of the organisation has been amazing to see. And a lot of that is as a result of Kate coming in and building and developing and growing the organisation. So
great, well done, Kate.
Thanks.
A lot of people say it may cost a lot of money to obviously renovate a place, but it costs much more money to run it. What are the costs of keeping Stretford Hall alive, and also how do you generate your revenues? What sorts of activities? I think that would be quite interesting to know for other people who want to do the same with such a place, similar places.
Yeah, so our running costs are about £11,000 a month. That is going to significantly increase this year because of our electricity bills. So our energy bills have gone from £20,000 2 years ago to £60,000 this year. So we've had a really massive increase in energy bills. Yeah. So we're really looking at what we can do in terms of improving energy efficiency to try and get that down, get our use down as much as we can. Yeah. So the running costs are about, kind of 11, 12 a month and 12k a month. And we've got various income streams. And I think that's been quite important, particularly during COVID, when one income stream, which was room hire, just sort of stopped overnight. Yeah. We've got a lot of tenanted space. So we've got a co-working space in the back of the building, an artist studio, and the parliamentary office as well. So our local MP is based here. And although we did agree some sort of rent holidays and things during COVID, but that's a regular, steady source of income that comes in every month. So that's really important, just to be able to rely on that, and know that that's coming in. We generate increasingly a lot of money from room hire. Yeah. And obviously the ballroom's been really important in sort of bigger packages like weddings and private parties. And then we do organise our own events and activities. So we're set up for cinema tonight. We've got a community cinema we run, live music nights.
All the seats there.
That's all the seats. Yeah. We're showing the David Bowie documentary tonight. And then we run community events, but we try to do everything for it to be affordable and accessible. So, that means kind of keeping the prices as low as we can. So we don't make huge profits on anything we do. And we are, a lot of our community work and our outreach is reliant on grant funding. Okay. So we've got a kind of a stripped down business model, which is running the building, hiring out the rooms, the very minimum that we can do, that we can kind of do sustainably. And then a lot of the extra work that we'd like to do, that sort of outreach, we have to rely on grant funding for that.
So if you didn't have the grant funding, would you be able to stay alive?
We would just about, we would, but we probably wouldn't be having the community impact we have. Yeah, we would be providing a community space. We would still be here. People could still use the building. We would still be looking after the building. So, which really was the aim of, the Friends when we started. So we would still be meeting our objectives as an organisation. But I think a lot of what we do now, the extra impact we have as an organisation, we do rely on sort of funding for that.
Yeah, that's quite important.
Yeah, and I think this is almost like it's a key consideration around, and for any kind of trading business that then also obviously has a strong community purpose. There's an element where, we want to increase our trading income to cover our operating costs because, we know that grants and funding is quite an uncertain kind of space to work in, and so we know that if we can increase our trading income, then we can provide continuity and sustainability and know that we can run the building, and I think still deliver really key aspects of providing affordable workspace for local people, putting on events, but the grants and that funding just allows us to extend our reach and impact and give us, I suppose, a bit more opportunity to try things out, I think.
Can you give some examples?
Well, I think probably a good example, Kate, you might come in on other things, but I think one of the things that when we came in quite early on was and it's still going now, is this Wellbeing Tuesdays. So we put on a series of wellbeing activities, yoga, chair aerobics, Pilates. But the idea is it was always going to be a very affordable offer. So we wanted to make it incredibly accessible. Anyone could come in and participate in the activities, and the cost shouldn't be a barrier. But we had to kind of work out the model of how we were going to do that, because obviously we have to bring in providers to deliver the classes, and obviously, they need to secure, they need to generate a livelihood, so we have to pay the providers, and so we're just like finding the right model, which means we can support local wellbeing providers, provide an affordable offer. And we were able to secure a few grants early on to just kind of make that model work. And that was sort of 5 years ago. And I think that was also probably the first instance of where we were able to keep the front door open in it throughout that day, because there was classes coming in, people could just come in. We had like a community cafe, pretty lo-fi cafe, but the idea of just allowing that, and that was sort of the start of basically of trying to get that real hub feel where people can come in and interact with the activities, get advice, be a place for information, advice, and contact and meet people, and I think that we've now extended that, and I don't know if you You're probably...
No, I think that's a good... I mean, I think lots of the activities we've done, we start with a bit of grant funding to kind of test them. I mean, like this morning, we've had a cookery class running with about, I think, 25 people came, just affordable. We're trying to promote slow cookers and, thinking about, we get a lot of people that come in for help with energy bills at the moment. So we're trying to support people to learn how to cook with slow cookers. And when these things are up and running, you're often able to find a way of running them without funding. So once something gets a bit of momentum and maybe people are willing to make donations to take part, and then volunteers get involved and they start taking over some of the running of it, then it's often possible for us to afford to run those things without grant funding. But usually that initial trying it out and maybe investing in a bit of equipment or marketing costs, those kind of things, just having a bit of grant funding takes the risk off us and means that we can try it out and then think about how to run it sustainably.
That's interesting. I know we discovered the air fryer as a replacement of the oven. It's much faster, and it doesn't consume as much electricity as an oven. So if you want to just roast some potatoes and with something else, then there's enough room for that for a family of 4 kids, 2 kids and 2 adults.
Yeah, and I think that's been a big development. I think co-locating activities. So basically, for me, I think that's a really valuable offer where, you might come in to do a yoga class, but then you can chat to someone from USwitch about your energy bills and then go and meet someone and just have a brew. And the idea that you're not saying, right, you've got to go, we're doing this thing, you need advice about this, and you've got to go in. And it's that idea that it's more informal and casual, and it allows, I don't know, for me, makes it more accessible and less stigma about interacting with certain things. I know mainly because my mum's a volunteer and she's involved, but we now do an English as a foreign language class, and that's become really popular. But it happens in, people come there, but then they might go and do yoga, and it's just that's what you get with a hub. It's that idea that people can interact with different parts of what we do, but it doesn't have to be structured and formal, which I think can put people off.
Obviously, I live in Stretford, and we come here very often with family and friends, and it's really nice to come with friends and just bump onto a few other people we partially know, not so well, or neighbours. It's great to all meet here, and obviously it's mainly for parties and big events that we come. But there's other smaller events that are great. We're going to have the Theatres Trust in a few weeks, and there's loads of data I want to ask John about. And there's one data I'm very interested in, is how when you go to a venue, then it benefits also going to a venue, or renovating a venue benefits the local businesses around the venue. Have you got any stats of maybe around Stretford? Probably not about Stretford Hall, but for every pound that's spent in Stretford Hall, for Stretford Hall, how much does do the small businesses or surrounding businesses get? And I know you're already engaging with a lot of small businesses, either inviting them in or suggesting people who come to a certain event to go. For example, the pizzeria there, Bakehouse 32. Have you got what's your data?
So we haven't done that piece of work looking at that local economic impact in monetary terms. It's actually something I emailed someone about yesterday, asking them if they could help us do it. So that would be really interesting. I think there are sort of general acknowledged figures about, a local business. Is it £1 £1 invested is, £3 in the local area, or but what we haven't looked at that in detail. What we do know are things like, the number of small businesses that have been supported through our co-working space, or the number of organisations that have used our rooms and have had access to community space. So we're getting much better at reporting on that on an annual basis.
Yeah.
So we can say, these are the number of organisations that have benefited from us being here. We've got a sustainable procurement policy, so we do try to focus on supporting local businesses and favouring local businesses and local contractors, just to try and ensure that our money is invested locally. And and it's actually something quite often funders ask for. So funders will ask, how many of your staff live in your local area, how many of your so there is a sort of an interest from funders and that kind of thing. But I think that very detailed economic piece of work isn't something we've quite done yet.
What's been interesting is when we initially took on the hall, there wasn't really a particularly, I would say, big nighttime economy in Stretford, just because of the way the mall was run at that time. It was predominantly a retail offer. Yeah. And sort of the big change over the last 5 years has been diversity in the offer in Stretford. So, there's now way more pubs, bars, restaurants than there were at the beginning. So I think it's been interesting because I think one of the things that we anticipated here at the beginning was that we were going to we felt at the time that we were going to be a key driver of the nighttime economy, because there didn't seem to be anything else going on. And I think it was when we started thinking, maybe we should have a dedicated bar or a dedicated cafe in the space, that nighttime offer. But I think what's been really interesting is that's happened. And, I don't, obviously it's difficult to attribute the hall helped stimulate, but I'm sure it was helpful. Yeah. And but I also think it's quite interesting that I think it means that we can be part of a wider nighttime economy, where we put on an event here and people might, so tonight we've got 100 people coming for cinema, maybe a few more. And I'm sure, that will then, it's not going to go on late, but then people will go elsewhere or might get some food before, so it's actually, I think, having a nighttime or an evening offer then hopefully helps. And I think for us, it's great because it sort of complements. So people will see what we've got on and think, we'll come to this because actually we can go somewhere else afterwards. And it means that people locally have got someone on their doorstep rather than going to town or going to Chorlton. So, So
a big rivalry between Stretford and Chorlton.
Yeah. But so I think that's been an interesting change, because I think initially we're like, okay, the hall there's going to be a lot of, we really need to seize the nighttime offer because we're going to be the main nighttime kind of potentially proposition in Stretford.
Because is it your intent?
Well, I think we're more relaxed about it now because we can plan about what's best within. I think the main thing is we did quite a lot of work around should we open like a cafe in the hall. We did some feasibility around that, and there was always going to be restrictions, limitations, but obviously there was at that time. We did quite a lot of consultation, and there wasn't a huge kind of offer. And since then we've had Friends of Victoria Park with the cafe in the park, Uplift, Stretford Food Hall, Head, the Hive, all these places that are now here. And
I think. But I was going to say that I think one of our objectives is to respond to community need. That's in our terms of sort of existence, is that we are aiming to provide what the community needs in this area. And the fact that we're able to kind of respond and change those objectives slightly. So it's like, maybe, that Stretford doesn't need a cafe at the moment. It doesn't need nighttime because that's being done elsewhere. But actually what we're doing is, serving as a community hub and helping people with access, fuel support, and and that's what's kind of needed, and that's how we're sort of responding. So I think having that flexibility to be able to sort of say, okay, let's we do quite a lot of consultation. We're always sort of like asking people what they want to see and what they'd like to be going on in the building, and constantly doing that, and that's important from a a fundraising point of view, because a funder would ask, well, how do you know it's needed? How do you know that the local community wants it?
Yeah.
But also just because that's what we're here for, really, is just to to provide what is needed. I was just going to, to jump back a bit, I was just going to say about the investment. I think the hall has very definitely had a big impact on investment, because when the Stretford secured Future High Streets funding, 19 million for the first phase of the redevelopment, and the renovation of the hall and the asset transfer was featured in that bid as an example of the fact that the community were leading development already in Stretford, and we wrote a letter of support with that bid that went in. And I do think that the success of that, and the reason that that funding was secured, in part, was because of all the not just here. There was other examples of community businesses that were really successful, like the SIP Club, and the fact that all of those, the community itself was trying to kind of look at solutions and develop, I think really strengthened that bid. So I think we probably did have quite a direct link to that extra funding coming into the town centre.
That's quite interesting. Do you know if the renovation of the mall, it started to happen just after the hall was renovated? When the hall was renovated, before, has it always been on the plans? And because maybe it was also a case to renovate the mall as well and all the places around. Presumably the hall has had some... has given more of an incentive for the mall to be renovated. Maybe, I don't know. Do you know about this?
Yeah.
I think it was the asset transfer of the hall in one of the much earlier versions of the Stretford Master Plan was cited as a step in that redevelopment. So that was seen as one of the early things that they were going to do to sort of revive the town centre, was this asset transfer of the hall. So I think it's part of that ongoing work. I think they looked at all the local assets and said, okay, well, how can we renovate those, or how can we redevelop them? Or just make use of them. And I think the handover of the hall was identified quite early on as a first step in that much wider phase of redevelopment.
Yeah, I think it's obviously always difficult to know. There's so many things at play, but obviously Stretford has had a lot of kind of top-down master planning work that then hasn't kind of got anywhere to a degree. It's maybe a bit harsh, but there's been quite a lot of consultation and engagement to say, look, we know that the town centre in Stretford is, there's parts of it that don't work in, and it could be a much better, more livable place. Mm-hmm. And I think, obviously, the big change has been bringing them all into the master plan with the Trafford Council and Bruntwood relationship, because essentially it was in private ownership, and so it's very difficult to master plan an area where I don't know a percentage, but it's a big chunk of your town centre is in private ownership, and it was difficult to engage with them all. So now is the opportunity is that that's plugged in.
Yeah.
So I think from our point of view, it's like there's a lot of potential to do something quite bold, and I think because the mall's obviously a key part now of the master plan, and I think for us it's just now we want to kind of feed into that, because we feel like we don't speak for the whole community, but we do a lot of work with the community, and we want to kind of try and help feed in what the community actually really wants to see with the master plan.
is there anything you wanted to do at the beginning and you can't do and you would like to do? Or I know you've got plans for the future of renovations or extensions. Is that primarily for that nighttime aspect that you would like to increase? Is it, what would you like to do and what you haven't been able to do during the renovation?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I think one of the things would be around like volume levels and noise levels. Mm-hmm. And I think there was definitely a hope that we would be able to have more louder music sort of events in the hall, particularly in the evening. And we've just really struggled with being so close to residential buildings. Yeah. And, not having the money to invest in triple glazing and some of the things that might have like limited that a bit. So we have had to, I think, kind of rein in that aspiration a bit in the short term, I think. Yeah. Because in the longer term, we are still looking at renovating the basement. Mm-hmm. And we've got a huge space downstairs, down in the basement. It's the footprint of the building. So, there's real potential down there, and that would, potentially provide a space where we could do more sort of late night, louder activity.
How large is the basement?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, I'm terrible with
in terms of proportions compared to the hall. Is it as big?
But it runs the whole space.
The whole shape. Yeah, it's the whole of the
so
hall.
You've got sort of more than even this ballroom in terms of footprint to work with. Yeah,
it's pretty big.
Yeah,
it's big.
It's massive and high. It's not it's not small. It's not low ceilings. It's quite high. There used to be a gymnasium when it was built. It had a gymnasium down there when it was.
It was a
gymnasium. I need to go and have a look if we can.
Yeah. That's I think one of the things we would like to do, but cost-wise, it's it's a really expensive bit of work. 4 million, we think. To do that, and we would have to put in a new lift. So there's quite a lot of other work that would need to go on to improve the building circulation to sort of open up that area. So we are looking at that, and that's in the long-term 5-year plan.
Yeah, you're still going for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably something. I mean, the pace of things, I think, in community organisations is because basically, it took us 5 years. Really, to do this. Mm-hmm. And, if you were a commercial business, that would be potentially difficult, to navigate commercially if you basically can't realise a plan within, especially because, a commercial outfit would have probably come in and done it very, quicker. But, that's the thing that you have to sort of change your mindset around the pace of how you do things in a community organisation, because it's more deliberative. Obviously, you've got to raise the money in a, we can't, and I don't think it would be economically difficult to take take debt, and we'd do things in a more sustainable, patient way, because that, will mean that so I think, we have to look at things in a slightly longer term basis.
So you're not going to take any loans, you're not going to go to a bank for investment?
No, we've taken a very small, flexible loan, but it's relatively small amount compared to, and that's why the community share offer has been such a important part of the funding mix, because it's very patient investment. And our AGM, most of our members come back and say, we're happy not to take interest. We're happy to keep our money in. We like what you're doing. Yeah. We know that we don't get it right all the time. Like, that's obviously what comes with running an organisation, doing lots of different things and experimenting. But I personally feel that we have a lot of goodwill from the community that allows us to do things on a slightly longer time frame. And I think that's important. And that means that has to factor into our plans, basically.
So are you able to to break down or to say, you're going to be, do you know you're going to be able to raise that amount of money, and how, from which sources? I know you've talked before about the National Lottery. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that the National Lottery Heritage Fund are the most likely funders of certainly a large amount of that. A lot of the work that needs to be done is just sort of structural building work.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of funders that won't fund that kind of activity. They're interested in the very direct spaces that a community will use. So we found it quite easy to get funding for the ballroom because it's very obviously a community space that people are going to be in. But when you start talking about, windows needing repairing and, all of the kind of, building repairs and things that we need to be doing as well as the renovation, it's a bit harder. So I think it's more likely to be a funder that's interested in heritage buildings and protecting the fabric of the building. We've also it's one of the few funders we haven't actually been to yet. We haven't had any. We had a very small amount, but not recently. So it's it's a funder we're still hoping to kind of work with in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, at the time when we took the building on and said we're going to do the ballroom, we're going to raise this much money from the community, like naturally quite a lot of people said that doesn't sound like you're going to be able to do that. That sounds quite hard. And we even thought at the time when we launched the share offer that it was going to be difficult.
Yeah.
I remember like halfway through the offer we were still quite a way off our target, but I think I think we realised that I think there's an element of confidence about doing things, and so we don't know how we're going to do it, and it will be difficult. But I think we have to be like we have to give ourselves a little bit of confidence that it's something that we should aim for, and we could. Like, I think it's important that we don't just say, "Oh, that's impossible." We're not a commercial business, and we can't. So for me, it's like it's important to be a bit ambitious, but also realise that the time frames that you're probably working are slightly longer than you might find elsewhere.
Are you thinking of increasing the events you organise, or is that like full capacity running at the moment?
No, we're not at full capacity. Okay. So our focus is mainly on the hire. So not so much our own events and things, because obviously there's a lot more staff time in those. But we're not at sort of capacity in terms of just room hire and, like private parties and weddings. So we're spending quite a lot of time just looking at improving the marketing of that. We haven't really had to do a lot of external marketing. A lot of our customers just word of mouth and people coming to events and then thinking that there might be somewhere that they could hire for whatever event.
Yeah.
So we're definitely, I think, over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, just looking at getting the rooms hired as often as they can be, rather than more events and things, which, they do generate a bit of profit, but then there's more risk and it's more staff time. And so, I think just maximising the room hire income is sort of priority at the moment. That's
quite interesting. Yeah, it's really hard to keep the balance between doing something to benefit the community and having things affordable and inclusive, but also staying afloat and expanding as well.
Yeah, I think we're really fortunate in that we've got some really, some key things that really help.
Yeah.
And I think one of them probably haven't mentioned is our volunteers. So we've got some absolutely amazing volunteers who, with just so many things that we do, we probably wouldn't be able to do without that volunteer effort. And we've got, a volunteer manager, fantastic volunteer manager, because it does require, it's not something you can just do overnight and expect people to.
Yeah.
But I do think that really helps, having a strong, active volunteer base, because it just, again, it allows you to reduce your costs really a lot of the time, because you can you can rely on volunteers to help run activities and events. And so it is difficult, but I feel that is something that really helps, because it just gives us a bit of scope, basically.
Yeah.
So very, very grateful for volunteers who put in a lot of time.
The community in Stretford is very special, and it's great. I like that feel, and I don't see that very often in other areas, or from friends who live, or family who live in other places. Then they don't seem to have that. So it's great for us adults, but also for the kids. And Stretford's great. I mean, I'm constantly amazed about how community kind of respond to everything that happens in Stretford. You know, right from the beginning of, getting people to put in quite a considerable sum of money into to big old space, to everything that, all the activities and the response and the events and the input. And I think you see it now with the other businesses and organisations in Stretford. And I think there is something quite unique. And I think it's just, keeping hold of that, really, I think is key. But there's a lot of places who would like to do what you've done, and it's quite a big achievement to do that already. And so many areas are really struggling, and probably that community factor is really lacking. Maybe the communities are not as engaged, so they don't care so much about a place a hub, as you said, where they can all gather, and an organisation that listens to their needs and what they want, what they would like.
I think it's also really hard.
Yeah.
It's, there's a lot of obstacles in the way, and especially around the kind of communities taking on spaces and assets. Like I said, I think we were quite lucky just at the time that the campaign. There was just a few things that just helped. I'm not saying it wouldn't have happened otherwise, but the policy landscape and I just think, and part of me thinks it's much harder now, maybe. And obviously with just practically with cost of living and energy prices, it's obviously harder now to put that proposition together.
One question I forgot to ask is, how did you go through the pandemic? How was it for you?
Well, we were sort of lucky, because it was when we were just about to start the tender process for the ballroom renovation. So we'd already factored into our business plan this period of the hall, or certainly the upstairs, all being shut, and losing that income for kind of 8 months anyway. So we were really fortunate, I think, for the determination of the architects and the professional team to just keep going and to respond really quickly to make sure that we could kind of keep the renovation on track.
Yeah.
So they came in, and I think because construction was one of the few industries that was allowed to kind of continue, wasn't it? It was still sort of, they were keeping hospitals being built and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So, within kind of weeks of lockdown, they came and made videos because we weren't going to be able to have contractors on site to look round. So that, they just responded really well. And I think that made a huge difference to us, because had we had to shut and then have another 12 months shut after that, when the renovation was taking place, we would have really struggled. We wouldn't have had reserves left by that point, I think. So I think we definitely were lucky that we managed to get the renovation done and keep going with that without sort of losing that time. We obviously we shut all the rooms. We lost all the room hire income. But very early on in the pandemic, we were approached by Trafford Council to act as a community hub for Stretford. And what they were looking for was local organisations that could sort of mobilise volunteer effort and distribute food parcels, help people collect prescriptions, that kind of thing. and, you know, we had a staff team, we were here, we were able to kind of use the building. So we did that. We sort of responded really quickly. We were delivering food bank parcels within about 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's obviously when you think back, you have that kind of odd sensation of trying to think back and how difficult and uncertain it was. But it was, we had to respond pretty quickly. And again, it was amazing how volunteers suddenly changed from like running events to delivering food parcels and running a helpline. Which was, that was I think allowed us to change. We were able to pivot quickly because we could call on staff volunteers just to kind of get that going. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
I think one thing that was really good was that thanks to Simon, we've always been, I think, had really good IT systems and, cloud-based systems. And so I know there was lots of, I know of other community organisations that when they shut, all of their, everything they needed was on hard drives in buildings they couldn't access, whereas our staff team could just work at home the next day. Straight away everything we needed was just cloud-based, and that made a real difference, I think, in how quickly we were able to just keep going as a team. And
yeah, we had. I mean, the phone line was. We actually had to set up a completely virtual phone line with every volunteer in their respective homes, and so that was an interesting tech project to. But in a way, it was nice to be able to do something. Because, like I say, it was such a bizarre time for everyone to try and navigate and to have something to kind of focus on. But yeah, I do remember thinking, wow, I was not anticipating having to try and set up a completely virtual phone line in a
call centre software.
You've done so much for the hall, and you do so much in Stretford. Obviously, you know your nickname, Mr. Stretford. I don't know anybody else. I think everybody knows your face, knows who you are. They might not know your name, but they know.
I mean, I think having quite a recognisable bike probably helps as well.
Probably as well. Yeah. Right. We usually finish the podcast with what's your favourite venue for, but I've decided to change it a little bit. And so there's 6 questions. Wow. And obviously you can answer. What has been your favourite event organised by the hall? What's your most memorable one?
My favourite was, it was called Bring On the Brass. And it was the weekend before Christmas, when Christmas was sort of cancelled because of COVID. We had that announcement on the Sunday or the Saturday. And we'd had a lot of people that had been telling us that they'd been looking forward to having brass bands playing in the hall when it was renovated. And so we were trying to think, is there a way that we can kind of take brass bands to people? So our events coordinator, Jess, did an amazing job of planning these routes. And it was a bit like a sort of New Orleans, what do they call it? Second lining, is it?
Yeah.
So we had these 2 brass bands basically playing Hacienda classics.
Yeah, it was.
And walking around all the streets of Stretford with this big kind of crowd following them. Yeah,
I thought it brought a lot of, kind of Christmas cheer in a period that was or festive cheer in a period that was, difficult, I think. It was a great event.
So weirdly, it's not actually an event that was at the hall, but that was one of we have organised things outside of the hall, and I think that was one of my favourites.
I mean, I love that event too, but I think the opening of the ballroom where we had the Untold Orchestra, which, if people don't know, is a fantastic orchestra in Manchester that do a number of events.
Yeah, I agree.
And so we had our opening event when we in July 2021, and we've never had that many musicians, I think, on stage, and it was great, and just to see the new ballroom being used after 2 years or a year and a half of no activity was very good.
Cool. I guess the second question you already answered is, what's your best memory about the hall? It doesn't have to be an event.
Well, for me, the final night of the share offer
Yeah.
And that was just amazing. And yeah, we hit target on that final night, 250,000. That was pretty special.
Amazing. How about you, Kate?
I don't know. I don't know about a particular memory. I mean, like, we do a Christmas fair that I always love, so we do that every year. Yeah. So I'm more fond of those. Yeah.
What's your worst memory about the hall, if you can say?
Wow. I mean, when we had to get up on the roof after the lead theft to put a temporary
lead theft.
Yeah, that was quite difficult. Basically had a gaping hole on the roof, and we had to try and fix it, improvise with some sort of tarp. That was quite. That was a particularly challenging time, I think.
Mine. I mean, we've got some toilets we have a persistent problem with blocking. So I've got quite a few bad memories of having to try and unblock toilets, but nothing too bad, I don't think.
What would be your dream about the hall, if it isn't true yet?
I think definitely the basement, and that extension that we've had a sort of architect's drawing of what it could look like with a new entrance facing the town centre. Is that public, by the way? Or is it on your website?
So basically we've, as with all these things, we feel our members are obviously our main stakeholders. They're part of our governance. So we've shown some outline plans to members, but again, it's very much like around managing expectation. So I think we've talked about that we want to do the basement and think about the building. But again, like learning in terms of like the share offer, when we had to go out because we were raising money, we had to go out with like a big, bold, we're going to do this ballroom transformation. But it did put quite a lot of stress and pressure on us, and predominantly as volunteers, to see that through. So I think we're basically recognising that we want to be a bit more careful about and work, because we just it's that thing that we wanted. We obviously have plans and aims, and we try and share those, but at the same time realise that it's really hard and it's going to take a long time, and we have to be kind of careful about what we sort of pledge and commit to, because it's not a done deal by any means. So I think that is always going to be a really difficult manoeuvre to basically like let people know about what we want to do, but at the same time like realise that don't build people's hopes up, because actually that's quite a difficult thing as well. I don't know if you have any.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I think because it's like what we've also learned is you can face very expensive, unexpected repairs at very short notice. So, you might think you're making progress in terms of fundraising towards a given target, but then actually things come up that, you haven't anticipated, and you can be kind of pulled in other directions because of the nature of the building, I think. So again, it's just about like managing that community expectation, isn't it?
What sort of advice would you give to people who would like to do the same as you've done for Stretford Hall? So,
I mean, actually, Anushka, who was one of the founding members of the chair, she flagged this as a key thing. Is about trying to basically realise that you can't do everything, and you will, burn out. I mean, you've got to ask for help and really just like call on people, because there's so many people with skills and experience and amazing talents in your community who will come in and will do amazing stuff for no return. And I think that is just like, but you've got to be open. You've got to ask for it, and empower people as well to say, trust them and because that was a massive benefit of all the input that we got at the beginning. Just so many countless people putting in time on every different facet of getting going. So just ask for help all the time. It's probably mine.
Yeah, and I suppose just like have confidence that you can do it.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a definitely a tendency. I think if you're talking to a local council about handing over community building or about community asset transfer, there's this sort of sense that they don't recognise that there are those expertise within a local community that you would draw on, and that you are capable of doing a project to a high standard and doing things properly. It's. I think there was real surprise for a lot of people when they came into the ballroom, and I'm not. I think maybe they thought we were just going to have painted it ourselves and done it ourselves, and it's kind of like, it's really it looks good, it looks really, there's real surprise that it is at the standard it is. And I think it's that recognising, like you said, that there is expertise in the community, and you are perfectly capable of doing a project, even a massive project, much bigger than this. I mean, I feel like we are confident about the extension and the basement, but don't lose sight of that as well,
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's the thing, I think, is I think that thing of where people, I think having great spaces that you want to be in has so much community benefit. Just, you come in here and you instantly feel a bit better about things because you're in a lovely space. And we're so lucky to have, this one building in so, I think we should, feel like we can realise the potential of these spaces and not say, we'll just cut, we'll just do that and, cut that corner. I think, I think it's important that you can say, look, we've got such a valuable space here, let's do it. It's really maximise what we can do with the space.
Yeah. Last question. Have you got anybody to suggest for High Point, the podcast?
Oh, that's a good question.
A place or people?
Well, I was just been talking to a group in Ramsbottom, Co-op Hall, and they're trying to do. It's a similarly old building, theatre space. It's actually in very challenging condition, and they're just on the first steps of the journey of hoping to take it over, do the share offer. So, I think it could be interesting to get a view of what at the very early stages of a project.
Okay.
And it's quite cool to go and see them and sort of remember what it was like at that time, because you sort of forget. Ramsbottom Co-op Hall.
Does it have to be local?
It doesn't have to be local.
No, I mean I think one of the places I visited quite early on that was quite.
We might go soon to Scotland, and we're going to go to Cardiff, the BBC Wales.
Great.
Okay, yeah.
So it's not just Manchester.
There's an art centre called Trinity Arts in Bristol, and it was one of the places where I visited early on and felt like this is what I think we want to be trying to do. It was a really nice balance of protecting this beautiful building, but it was really vibrant. There was loads of different groups using it. They have an amazing programme of performers. The music offer is what we would, I think, probably aspire to, but probably not get our neighbours to agree to. But it's a really great space.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, I definitely recommend a trip there as well.
Well, thank you very much. It was really nice. How can we get in touch with you or the hall and support the hall? Have you got a website?
Yeah, the website. You can donate on the website. You can become a member. You can see all our listings and get in touch with us. So stretfordpublichall.org.uk.
Follow us on social media.
Yeah.
Great. Cheers.
Thanks, Mark. Take care. Thank you.
Cheers.